Alright, I think it's safe to say enough of you enjoyed my video about ironic last words to warrant me making a second one, which will make this the first part 2 I've ever done on this channel. And here I thought it would be the Sonic video you all loved. So welcome to Ironic Last Words Part 2. If you haven't seen the first part, you should probably watch that one instead, since this will mostly be the rejects that weren't quite good enough to make the other video. Now, just as a quick prelude before we begin, I've seen the comments. I know Charlie Kirk's last words were ironic. What do you want me to do with that, huh? You want me to riff about that? You think that's gonna end well for me? I don't need my comment section looking like a Crossfire episode. At least give me 10 years before I tackle that one. So with that out of the way, let's start with Terry Kath, one of the founding members of the rock band Chicago. And Kath was not some random triangle player who happened to be on the first Chicago album. He was one of the lead singers and the only guitarist in the band. And they didn't need another one, because Terry was so good that Jimi Hendrix supposedly once told the band, "Your guitarist is better than me." If you've ever enjoyed the guitar solo on 25 or 624, that was Terry Kath. And like every rock star back then and also today, he had a penchant for drugs and alcohol. He once told Chicago drummer Danny Seraphine, "I'm going to get things under control. If I don't, this stuff is going to kill me." But no, those were not his last words. And you might be surprised to hear that he did not die of an overdose. But he was partying it up on January 23rd, 1978 at the Los Angeles apartment of Don Johnson. No, not that Don Johnson. This was a roadie for the band. I did say it was an apartment after all. Apparently, Terry had been on a multi-day bender and actually brought his guns to Johnson's apartment and was cleaning them at the kitchen table. Don Johnson told him to be careful, but Terry shrugged it off. He showed Johnson that the semi-automatic pistol he was cleaning didn't even have a clip in it. He then said, "What do you think I'm gonna do, blow my brains out?" before holding the gun to his head and pulling the trigger. And, as you can maybe guess, there was a bullet in the chamber and Terry was instantly killed, leaving a stunned Don Johnson regretting that he said anything at all. In the wake of his death, Chicago originally considered disbanding, but ultimately decided to stay together and make more music. But without Terry Kath, the band shifted away from his style of jazz rock and started making more pop songs and love ballads, which ironically probably helped them stay relevant in the 80s. By the 90s, their stuff was a complete disaster, but this is not a grain of music history, so I'll move on. Next up, we have Louis Mountbatten, the first Earl Mountbatten of Burma. He was the uncle of Prince Philip and the second cousin once removed of Queen Elizabeth II. Don't think too much about that family tree there. Lord Mountbatten served in the Royal Navy in both World Wars, rising his way up to Supreme Allied Commander, which sounds pretty important. He then became the last Viceroy of British India, the first Governor-General of Independent India, and the head of the entire British Armed Forces. He was also the chairman of the NATO Military Committee, a mentor to the future King Charles III, and was alleged to be a prolific pedophile. So needless to say, the guy had a busy schedule. But in 1979, Mountbatten took a vacation to his summer home off the coast of Ireland. On August 27th, he went for a trip on his fishing boat, Shadow 5, with a few family members. And a couple of minutes after leaving the shore, the boat exploded and Mountbatten was killed. To provide some context, this was in the middle of a period that British and Irish people refer to as the Troubles, which is a rather quaint way to describe a decades-long ethno-nationalist paramilitary conflict that killed thousands of people. With IRA attacks happening periodically throughout the Troubles, there was concern among Mountbatten's security team that he could be a target. Shortly before his death, he was asked whether he was concerned about such an attack, to which he reportedly said, "Do you really think the IRA would think me a worthwhile target?" Well, clearly they did, because they had planted a bomb on his boat the night before. So let that be a lesson to you all. There is such a thing as being too humble. Mountbatten's death was mourned across the United Kingdom and even in the United States, as many American soldiers had served under him in World War II. People were undoubtedly shocked by the violent assassination of such an impactful and beloved figure of world history. Unless those allegations are true, of course, in which case, all I can say is Ireland forever. Next up, we have Richard Loeb, one half of the duo Leopold and Loeb. And although they sound like a pop rock act who taught Hall & Oates everything they know, they were actually a pair of kidnappers and murderers. In 1924, they kidnapped and killed a 14-year-old named Bobby Franks in Chicago. Nathan Leopold was a big fan of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and his concept of the Übermensch, a person with superior intellect and capabilities. He believed that he and his lover Richard Loeb were Übermenschen, and his plan to prove it was for them to commit the perfect crime. Now, I would probably assume that the perfect crime is something like stealing the Mona Lisa, or whatever Bane did at the stock exchange in The Dark Knight Rises. But Leopold and Loeb decided that the actual perfect crime was killing a random child. There's no way this video is getting monetized, is there? Anyway, their pursuit of the perfect crime fell apart when police discovered Leopold's glasses at the crime scene. Classic Übermensch behavior. Since there were only 3 people in the Chicago area with his exact prescription, there weren't a ton of suspects. The men soon confessed, with each of them insisting that the other one had done the actual killing. Either way, the case went to trial, where the Leopold and Loeb families pitched in to hire the best attorney in the country, a man named Clarence Darrow, paying him the equivalent of $1.2 million today. And Darrow's brilliant advice as their attorney was to plead guilty. He figured that even if they went with an insanity plea, the jury would still give the duo the death penalty. So they pled guilty in hopes of getting life in prison instead. On the day of the sentencing, Clarence Darrow reportedly gave an 8-hour speech that is now considered the greatest speech of his career by many Darrow heads. And surprisingly, it worked. The 2 men were given life imprisonment, plus 99 years for good measure. And they were sent to the same prison, where they actually remained friends. Glad they could put the whole confessing thing behind them. But in January of 1936, over 11 years into the sentence, Richard Loeb was attacked and killed by a fellow prisoner. Apparently, Loeb had propositioned him for sex, and the prisoner responded by slashing him 56 times with a razor. His last words after the attack were, quote, "I think I'm going to make it." Always the optimist, that Loeb. Much of the nation celebrated his death, but Nathan Leopold lived on. And, surprisingly, he was actually granted parole in 1958, only 33 years into his sentence. I have no idea what compelled them to release a man who was clearly psychopathic, but maybe this was a precursor to the hippie ways of the swingin' 60s. Either way, Leopold moved to Puerto Rico, worked some odd jobs, committed more crimes, and died of diabetes at the age of 66. Just like Friedrich Nietzsche wrote it up. Now let's talk about Vic Morrow, who I wasn't originally going to cover, but the video is dark enough already that I might as well. Vic Morrow was an actor who rose to fame in the 60s and continued acting until 1983, when he met his demise on the set of the Twilight Zone movie. Yes, for those of you who don't know, the famous TV show The Twilight Zone was turned into a movie that was essentially a 4-part anthology film where each part was like a different episode of the show. One of those parts was directed by John Landis, who had already directed Animal House and The Blues Brothers. But it was the Twilight Zone movie that would forever change his legacy. Landis' segment was about a bigoted man who finds himself teleported back in time to various racial conflicts, such as the Jim Crow South and Nazi Germany. This is the thing that was finally going to end racism, guys. But while they were filming a scene where the man is teleported to the Vietnam War, everything went wrong. They had to film a sequence in which Vic Morrow carries 2 Vietnamese children away from the American military chasing them. But when Morrow had to run past a helicopter for the scene, a practical effect explosion was detonated near the helicopter, causing the rotor to fly off. The helicopter spun out of control and hit the actors, killing Morrow and the children instantly. His last words before the shoot were reportedly, quote, "I've got to be crazy to do this shot. I should have asked for a double." But to be fair, while he wouldn't have died if he had asked for a double, he also would have had the worst survivor's guilt of all time. You're not sleeping at night after watching that go down. Now, needless to say, the accident was a devastating catastrophe for the movie world. But the most surprising part of the whole thing is that the film still got made. It even made its release target of the following year, despite the fact that there was ongoing legislation against the filmmakers for what had happened. The court case revealed that the hiring of the child actors violated California laws, with the producers telling the children's parents to hide them from an on-set safety officer. John Landis, who had apparently demanded that the helicopter fly lower than the pilot intended, quickly followed up the Twilight Zone movie by directing the film Trading Places and the music video for Thriller, which were both well received enough that his career was able to continue. You can kill some actors or put out a bad movie, but if you do both of those things, we're gonna have to cancel you. Landis was ultimately acquitted of criminal charges, although he and the studio were sued by the families of the child actors and by Vic Morrow's daughters, one of whom is the actress Jennifer Jason Leigh. But beyond some payouts to those people, the career of John Landis was largely unaffected. He continued directing big films through the 90s and is still a part of the industry today. And perhaps that's even scarier than a racist getting teleported to the Vietnam War. Finally, we have Henry Winstanley, a painter, merchant, and finalist for the most English name of the 17th century. In many ways, he was a jack of all trades, starting off as an architectural engraver, who then began designing playing cards, who then started building hydraulic gadgets, and eventually opened a carnival house called Winstanley's Waterworks. Okay, maybe he wasn't a jack of all trades so much as a jack of weird, unrelated, hyper-specific trades. And he soon began one more. Believe it or not, Winstanley's Waterworks became a huge financial success, and Henry Winstanley used some of his earnings to purchase 5 ships. Unfortunately, 2 of those ships were destroyed when they crashed into the Eddystone Rocks off the coast of Cornwall, England. Apparently, ships were constantly crashing into the Eddystone Rocks, and nobody bothered to do anything about it. Winstanley was told that the rocks were too treacherous to build on, which he took as a challenge, announcing that he would construct a lighthouse there himself. And unlike in the movies, where a character announces an ambitious plan and people tell him he can't do it, everyone was actually really supportive of this. The Royal Navy even gave him ships and men to help construct the lighthouse. So in July of 1696, Winstanley began working on the Eddystone Lighthouse. And like everything he did, it was extremely eccentric. The tower was made of wood and granite, engraved of course, with ornamental features and a 60-candle lantern in the glass room at the top. Oddly enough, Winstanley was actually captured by the French in the middle of construction. The Royal Navy had been providing him with a ship for protection since they were in the midst of the 9 Years' War with France. But one day in June of 1697, the British government ordered that ship to join their fleet, and the French immediately swooped in and kidnapped Henry Winstanley. Thankfully, both countries quickly negotiated his release, apparently recognizing the good deed he was doing by building this lighthouse. Louis XIV reportedly said, "France is at war with England, not with humanity," before releasing him. Really feels like everyone just couldn't help but root for this guy. And he made them all proud when he completed the lighthouse in November of 1698. But Winstanley was his own greatest critic, as he felt that the 90-foot-tall lighthouse was still getting obscured by storms. So in 1700, he reinforced the lighthouse, expanded the height to 130 feet, and added a luxurious bedroom at the top. These days, it would make for a wonderful Airbnb. And finally, Winstanley was proud of his work. He even bragged to other people about how strong the structure was, reportedly saying several times over the years something along the lines of, "I would happily spend a night up there during the greatest storm there ever was." I think you can see where this is going. In 1703, his request was granted when England was hit with a storm so bad that the Church of England said it was God's vengeance for the sins of the nation. Good to know, thank you. Known as the Great Storm of 1703, it is estimated to have killed up to 15,000 people. Winstanley was not in his lighthouse when the storm began, but he was eager to see how it was holding up. So on day 2 of the storm, when the winds calmed down, he and a few others visited the lighthouse. Winstanley was thrilled to discover that his beautiful creation was still standing, and he was so overcome with pride that he told the rest of his group to go home, because he would be staying there overnight. When the group returned the following day, the lighthouse was completely destroyed and Winstanley was nowhere to be found. Unfortunately, we don't actually have Winstanley's exact last words, but it was probably something along the lines of, "Don't worry, I'll be completely safe in my indestructible lighthouse that this storm will never destroy. See you tomorrow." Okay, maybe that's a bit on the nose, but you get the idea. Thankfully, he did not die in vain, because his lighthouse was followed up by 3 different lighthouses constructed over the centuries since. Although the fourth Eddystone lighthouse that's there today certainly lacks the whimsy of Winstanley's glorious creation. And sadly, that stub next to it is the third lighthouse. The storm completely annihilated the first one. It's just a shame that a creative man and a beautiful lighthouse had to answer for the sins of the nation. So those are 5 more ironic last words. I hope this sequel lived up to expectations. To be honest, there's no way I have enough good ones for a part 3. But maybe if you guys really love this one, I'll string together some garbage and put out a third video that sucks so much that it actually makes the first 2 parts worse by association. Now please consider subscribing, or I'll make you listen to the Chicago albums from the 90s.